Kale arrived in the lab 4 minutes after Tyrus called him. He walked fast, his 6 legs clicking against the metal floor. But he was not worried. Flags happened. Systems glitched. Samples got contaminated. There was always a simple explanation. Then he saw Tyrus's screen. The display was covered in red triangles. They ran down the left side of the monitor in a long column, each one representing a genetic marker that the classification system could not place into any known category. Kale counted them. There were 43. In 22 years, the most flags he had ever seen on a single species was 6. That had been the Kreth, an engineered war species created by a civilization that had been dead for 10,000 years. The Kreth were considered one of the most dangerous organisms in the known galaxy. They had 6 flags. The humans had 43. "Run it again," Kale said. "I already ran it 3 times. Her voice was thin and tight. "Run it again." She ran it again. 43 flags. Same ones. Same positions. No errors in the sequencing. No contamination in the sample. The machine was working perfectly. The data was clean. Kale pulled a chair over and sat down. He told Tyrus to close the lab door. Then he told her to lock it. Then he told her to bring up the full analysis on the main display. They started with the first flag. It was the healing system. The human genome contained instructions for a regenerative repair process that ran constantly, every second of every day, from the moment a human was born until the moment it died. Broken bones would fuse back together on their own. Torn muscles would rebuild. Damaged skin would seal itself shut and form a protective layer of scar tissue. Even internal organs showed evidence of self-repair capability. Kale read the data twice. Among the species in the archive, this level of autonomous healing was only found in 2 categories: Class 7 apex predators and bioengineered military organisms. Nothing in between. Nothing that looked like the smiling, soft-skinned creatures that had walked through his lab that morning. He moved to the next flag. The human muscular and skeletal system was built for something the archive called persistence locomotion. Kale had to look up the term. It meant that humans could move, walk, jog, run for extraordinary distances without stopping. Not fast. They were not fast at all compared to most species, but they did not stop. Their bodies were designed to cool themselves through a liquid excretion system called sweat, which allowed them to regulate heat far beyond what fur-covered or scale-covered species could manage. They could move across open ground, under direct sunlight, for hours, for days, without pause. The classification system identified this as pursuit predation, a hunting strategy where the predator simply follows its prey until the prey collapses from exhaustion. It was so rare in the galaxy that most xenobiologists had only ever read about it in theory. The system had no other living example on file. Kale's mandibles clicked together slowly. He did not say anything. He moved to the next flag. This human brain produced a chemical cocktail under stress that the system had labeled a crisis override. When a human was threatened, frightened, or in pain, the brain would flood the body with a mix of chemicals, the primary one being something humans called adrenaline. This substance did several things at once. It increased physical strength, it accelerated reaction time, it sharpened focus, and, most disturbingly, it suppressed the sensation of pain. A human under the effects of this system could continue to fight, run, or act with broken bones, open wounds, and severe internal damage. They would not feel it. Their body would keep functioning at peak capacity until the threat was gone, and only then would the pain come rushing back. Kale had seen this kind of system once before. It was in the Kreth, the engineered war beasts, the ones with 6 flags, and the Kreth version was weaker than what he was looking at now. He moved on. The next set of flags dealt with something the system called environmental resilience. The analysis had cross-referenced the human genome with the geological and climate data from Earth, and what it found was difficult to believe. Humans had survived ice ages, long periods where their entire planet was covered in frozen water. They survived by wrapping themselves in the skins of dead animals and building shelters from whatever they could find. They made fire using their hands and simple tools. They did not hibernate. They did not migrate to warmer regions and wait. They walked straight into the cold and lived there. They survived supervolcanic eruptions that blocked out their sun and killed most of the plant life on their world. They survived plagues that killed more than half their population. They survived predators with claws, teeth, and venom that should have wiped them out 100 times over. And then the analysis showed something that made Kale stop reading for a full minute. Humans had survived each other. The genetic record showed evidence of organized, large-scale conflict between groups of humans stretching back tens of thousands of years. War was not something that happened to humans. It was something they did. Constantly. With increasing sophistication and destructive power. They started with rocks and sharpened sticks. They moved to metal blades, then to chemical explosives, then to weapons that split the basic building blocks of matter itself, devices capable of destroying entire cities in a single flash of light. They built these weapons, they used them, and then they built more. The system estimated that humans had killed more of their own species through organized violence than every natural disaster in their planet's history combined. And yet, after every war, their population grew. After every plague, their medicine advanced. After every ice age, their technology leaped forward. Every single thing that should have destroyed them instead made them stronger, smarter, and more numerous. They did not just survive catastrophe. They used it as fuel. Kale sat in silence for a long time after reading that section. The lab was quiet, except for the low hum of the sequencing machine. Tiris spoke first. "How is this possible?" she asked. "They were so nice. The engineer fixed our coolant line. The biologist asked about my family." Kale did not answer right away. He was looking at the full summary now. The final classification that the system had generated after processing all 43 flags. It was displayed in large text at the bottom of the screen, and it read, Species Classification, Unresolvable. Biological Profile matches Apex Predator and Engineered Combat Organism markers. Behavioral Profile matches Cooperative Prey Species. No existing category fits. Manual override required. Below that, in smaller text, the system had added a single-line summary, the kind it generated for quick reference in the archive's main database. It read, "An apex survivor disguised as a peaceful species." Kale read it 3 times. Then he stood up. "I need to contact the High Council," he said. Tyrus looked at him with wide yellow eyes. "The High Council? For a genetic report?" "This is not just a genetic report," Kale said. He gestured at the screen with 2 of his arms. "This is a warning. We invited a species onto this station that can outrun anything, out-heal anything, fight through injuries that would kill any of us, and has spent most of its own history at war. And we did not know. We looked at them and saw soft skin and flat teeth and friendly smiles, and we wrote them off as prey." He paused. His dark eyes were both focused on Tyrus now, which meant he was serious. "They are not prey," he said. "They have never been prey. Everything about the way they look and the way they act made us think they were harmless. But underneath that, underneath the smiles and the jokes and the handshakes, they are one of the most dangerous organisms this archive has ever recorded." Tyrus swallowed. "What do we do?" Kale said. "We seal this lab. We restrict access to this data, and I contact the council before those humans come back." He walked to the communications terminal and began composing a priority message. His hands moved fast across the controls, all 6 of them working at once. The message was short. It was addressed directly to the 12 leaders of the Galactic Union High Council, and it was marked with the highest security clearance the system allowed. The message read, "Urgent biological assessment. Species, human. Threat classification pending. Request emergency closed session. The archive has found something we have never seen before. They look like prey. They are not. Recommend immediate review before further contact is permitted." He sent it and sat back in his chair. The lab was silent. Somewhere out in the black of space, the starward crest was flying home. Nathan Cole was probably sitting in the captain's chair, smiling at nothing, thinking about the aliens he had met. Danny Ortiz was probably telling a joke. Grace Ellison was probably reading. Megan Shaw was probably writing notes about the station in her personal log. None of them had any idea that a single vial of blood had just changed everything. And on the screen behind Kale, the 43 red flags glowed quietly in the dark. The Galactic Union High Council met on Aetheris Prime, the capital station, a structure so large it had its own weather system inside its central dome. The council chamber sat at the heart of the station, a vast circular room with tiered seating carved from pale stone that had been brought from 12 different worlds. Each seat was shaped to fit a different body. Some were wide and flat, some were filled with water, some hung from the ceiling. The room could hold 300 representatives. Today, only the 12 founding members were present, and the doors were sealed. Dr. Kale stood in the center of the chamber, beneath a column of white light that made his black shell shine. He had brought his full report, every data point, every flag, every line of analysis. He had spent 4 days preparing this presentation, and he had not slept for any of them. The 12 council members watched him from their seats. They were the most powerful beings in the known galaxy. Among them were creatures that could crush stone with their bare hands, beings that could communicate through pure thought, organisms that had lived for thousands of years. They had governed the Union through wars, plagues, and the collapse of entire civilizations. Very little frightened them anymore. Kale was about to change that. He began with the basics. He showed them the human genome on the main display, a long spiraling structure that looked, at first glance, completely ordinary. He pointed out the standard markers: carbon-based biology, oxygen-dependent respiration, bilateral symmetry, sexual reproduction. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then he showed them the flags. He went through them one by one: the healing system, the endurance capability, the pursuit-predation markers, the adrenaline override. He spoke clearly and slowly, because he wanted every word to land. The chamber was silent. When he reached the section on human warfare, he paused. He brought up a timeline on the display, a long red line stretching across thousands of years, marked with hundreds of small symbols. Each symbol represented a major conflict. Some of them were so close together they overlapped. "This," Kale said, "is their history of organized violence against their own kind. In roughly 10,000 years of recorded civilization, they have fought an estimated 15,000 wars. They have developed weapons capable of splitting atomic nuclei, releasing energy equivalent to small stars. They built these weapons, tested them on their own cities, and then built enough of them to destroy their entire planet, several times over." He let that sit for a moment. "And then they stopped," he said. "They chose not to use them. They still have them. They simply decided not to." The first to speak was Ambassador Velik of the Rathani Collective. He was enormous, a being made of living crystal, 8 feet tall, with a body that shifted colors when he felt strong emotions. Right now he was a deep, dark red. "This is a Class 9 species," Velik said. His voice sounded like stones grinding together. "There is no debate. They must be quarantined immediately and barred from Union space." "On what grounds?" asked Representative Amara Din of the Irani Sovereignty. She spoke from a tank of warm liquid, her translucid body rippling as she moved. They have committed no hostile act against any Union member. They arrived unarmed. They provided biological samples willingly. Their captain spent 2 hours asking our staff about their children. Their biology is a weapon, Velik said. You heard the report. They can outrun, outlast, and outheal nearly every species in this room. They suppress their own pain during combat. They have been at war with themselves for their entire history. This is not a species we should allow anywhere near our worlds. Biology is not behavior, Amara said calmly. We do not classify species by what they could do. We classify them by what they choose to do. That is the founding principle of this union. The founding principle was written before we encountered a species like this, Velik snapped. The arguments spread quickly. Councillor Dreth of the Gorvathi Federation, a massive being covered in plates of gray stone, argued that the humans should be monitored but not restricted. Elder Sin of the Pale Court of Mithara, a thin and ancient creature who looked like a walking tree, said that fear was a poor basis for policy. Ambassador Kelith of the Vashari Communion, who communicated through patterns of light on her skin, suggested a covert surveillance program. 3 of the council members openly called for a military response. Not an attack, not yet, but a show of force. Move a fleet to the edge of human space. Make it clear that the Union was watching. 2 others suggested something quieter. Something that would make sure the humans never became a problem at all. The chamber grew louder. Voices overlapped. Colors shifted. The white light in the center of the room seemed to flicker under the weight of so many powerful beings arguing at once. In the back of the chamber, sitting in a small chair that was clearly not designed for someone of her rank, was Liaison Officer Nira Salvan. She was Urani, like Representative Amara, but younger and much lower in status. She had been assigned to accompany the human delegation during their visit to Valith 9 as a translator and cultural guide. It had been considered a throwaway assignment, a simple job for a junior officer. Nobody expected anything interesting to happen. Nira had watched the argument for over an hour without speaking. She was not supposed to speak. Junior officers did not address the High Council. But the longer she listened, the more a single memory kept rising to the surface of her mind, and the more she felt that someone needed to say what she was thinking. She stood up. The movement was small, but in a room full of beings who could sense vibrations, heat, light, and thought, it was noticed immediately. 12 pairs of alien eyes turned toward her. "Forgive me," Nira said. Her voice was steady, but her body was shaking slightly inside her liquid suit. "I know I do not have the rank to address this council. I was with the humans for 2 full days, and I think there is something you need to hear." Elder Sin, the oldest member of the council, raised one long branch-like arm. "Let her speak," he said. The chamber went quiet. Nira took a breath. Then she told them about the docking bay. On the 2nd day of the human visit, she said, there was an accident in docking bay 7. A loading crane malfunctioned and dropped a cargo container. It fell toward a group of Teresian maintenance workers, 4 of them, all young, none of them fast enough to move in time. She paused. The human engineer, Danny Ortiz, was standing 30 feet away. He was not part of the maintenance crew. He had no reason to be near the crane. He was just passing through. But when the container fell, he ran toward it. Not away, toward it. The council members were very still. He got underneath the container and caught it on his back and shoulders. The weight of it fractured 2 of his ribs and tore a muscle in his shoulder. He held it for 11 seconds, long enough for all 4 Teresians to crawl out from under it. Then the crane safety system kicked in and lifted the container away. Nira's voice was quiet now, but every being in the room could hear her clearly. When the medical team arrived, Danny Ortiz was sitting on the floor, holding his side and laughing. He told the Teresians not to worry about him. He said, and I am quoting directly, "I have had worse playing football." I don't know what football is, but he was not angry. He was not scared. He was laughing. She looked around the chamber. He healed in 3 weeks. He did not ask for compensation. He did not file a report. When I asked him later why he did it, he looked at me as if the question confused him. He said, "They were going to get hurt." What was I supposed to do? Just watch? The chamber was completely silent. I have read Dr. Kale's report, Nira continued. I understand what the data says. Humans are biologically extraordinary. They can heal from wounds that would kill most of us. They can run longer than any known species. They can fight through pain that would shut our bodies down. Their history is full of violence on a scale that is hard to understand. She straightened her back. But I do not believe they are disguised as a peaceful species. I believe they are a dangerous species that has chosen to be peaceful. And I believe that choice, made every single day by every single one of them, against every instinct their biology gives them, is the most remarkable thing in this entire report. She sat back down. The chamber stayed silent for a long time. Elder Sin was the first to move. He lowered his branch-like arms slowly and folded his long fingers together. The young officer makes a point that this council would be foolish to ignore, he said. Ambassador Velik said nothing. His crystal body had shifted from dark red to a pale, uncertain blue. The council did not reach a decision that day. The session was adjourned with no resolution, no vote, and no action taken. The representatives filed out of the chamber slowly, each of them carrying the weight of what they had heard. But Nira's words stayed in the room long after the lights went down. They hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. A dangerous species that chose to be peaceful. And somewhere out on the far edge of the galaxy, the humans carried on with their lives, completely unaware that their future in the stars was hanging by a thread. 3 months passed. The council had not voted. The debate had moved from the chamber into private rooms, quiet dinners, and encrypted messages sent between worlds. Half the galaxy's leadership wanted to welcome the humans. The other half wanted to build a wall around their solar system and pretend they did not exist. And then something happened that made the debate meaningless. The Boros Relay was a communications hub on the far edge of Union space. It was not a military station. It was not important in any strategic way. It was simply a place where signals were boosted and passed along. A post office for the stars. It had a small civilian population of around 6,000, mostly technicians, families, and traders passing through. It had a security team of about 40 officers, lightly armed, trained for bar fights and minor theft, not war. The Starward Crest had docked there 2 days earlier for a routine supply stop. Captain Nathan Cole and his crew were waiting for clearance to visit a nearby system as part of a trade mission. It was supposed to be a boring stop. Nothing was supposed to happen. The Varketh arrived without warning. They came out of faster-than-light travel in a wave. 9 ships, dark and angular, bristling with weapons. The Varketh were raiders. They lived on the edges of civilized space and took what they wanted. They were large, heavily built, with thick gray skin and faces full of sharp teeth. They were not smart enough to build their own ships, so they stole them. They were not organized enough to hold territory, so they attacked soft targets, took everything of value, and moved on. The Boros Relay was exactly the kind of target they loved. Minimal defenses, lots of civilians, easy pickings. The first shots hit the station's defense grid and tore it apart in under 3 minutes. The shield generators went dead. Emergency alarms screamed through every corridor. 6,000 civilians began to panic. The station's administrator, Director Hallis, was a Veshan, same species as Dr. Kale. He was old, experienced, and completely unprepared for what was happening. His security team reported to the command center with wide eyes and shaking hands. They had sidearms. The Varketh had boarding axes, and heavy rifles. Hallis sent a distress signal to the nearest Union fleet. The response came back in seconds, 9 hours away, minimum. 9 hours, against a Varketh raiding fleet that had already begun cutting through the station's outer hull. The first boarding parties entered through the cargo bays on the lower levels. They moved fast, smashing through doors, roaring in their deep guttural language. Civilians ran. Security officers fired their sidearms and were cut down in seconds. The Varketh did not slow down. They did not negotiate. They took what they wanted and killed anything in their way. Nathan Cole was in the Starward Crest's cockpit when the attack began. He watched the Varketh ships decloak on his sensor display and said nothing for exactly 4 seconds. Grace Ellison, sitting beside him, counted those seconds later. She said his face went completely still during those 4 seconds. Not afraid, not angry, just focused. Like a machine switching on. Then he stood up and said, "Get your gear." 12 minutes later, Nathan Cole was standing in Director Hallis's command center, looking at a map of the station. Hallis was terrified. Not just of the Varketh. He had read Dr. Cale's report. He knew what the smiling man standing in front of him really was. But the Varketh were already inside the station, and his people were dying. And the human was the only one offering help. "I have 4 people," Nathan said. "Tell me where your civilians are, where your choke points are, and where the Varketh are coming in." Hallis told him. Nathan studied the map for about 30 seconds. Then he started giving orders. He sent Grace Ellison to the civilian quarter on level 4, where over 3,000 people were trapped. Her job was simple. Get them moving, get them organized, get them to the sheltered core of the station. Grace took a medical kit, a flashlight, and nothing else. She did not need anything else. She arrived on level 4 to find chaos. Thousands of aliens, Tiresians, Urani, Gorvathi, Vashari, dozens of species, packed into corridors, screaming, crying, pushing against each other. Some of them were injured. Some of them were in shock. None of them knew where to go. Grace climbed onto a cargo crate in the middle of the corridor and spoke in a voice that was not loud but carried through the noise like a blade through water. "My name is Grace. I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to move together and move now. Anyone who is injured, raise your hand. Anyone who can carry someone, step forward." Hands went up. People stepped forward. Within 5 minutes, she had organized 3,000 panicking civilians into moving groups with designated carriers for the wounded. She walked at the front, checking every corridor before waving them forward. When the pack was too narrow for stretchers, she picked up a wounded Tiresian child and carried the child on her back for 6 levels. Danny Ortiz went to the engineering deck. He did not take a weapon. He took a wrench, a roll of cable, and a grin that had no business being on someone's face during an invasion. He spent the next 6 hours turning the station into a trap. He sealed corridors using the emergency bulkhead system, forcing the Varketh into narrow paths that he had chosen. He vented atmosphere from sections he knew were empty, suffocating boarding parties before they could reach the civilian areas. He overloaded power conduits at specific junctions, creating explosions that collapsed ceilings onto Varketh squads. He rerouted the station's fire suppression system to flood 3 decks with industrial coolant, dropping the temperature low enough to slow the cold-blooded Varketh to a crawl. He did all of this from a maintenance terminal on Deck 9, bleeding from a cut on his forehead that he had gotten when a ceiling panel fell on him during the initial attack. He never mentioned it. He never stopped working. At one point, a Varketh soldier found his position and broke through the door. Danny hit the soldier in the head with his wrench, dragged the unconscious body into a closet, closed the door, and went back to his terminal. Megan Shaw set up in the station's medical bay. She was not a combat medic, but she knew alien bodies, and she knew how they worked. When the security teams brought her a dead Varkith soldier, she examined it for 10 minutes and then sent a message to every defender on the station. The Varkith had a cluster of nerve endings behind their left ear that, when struck hard enough, would knock them unconscious instantly. Their thick skin was weakest at the joints. Their eyes were sensitive to bright light. That information changed the fight. Security officers who had been losing every encounter suddenly started winning. A single Teresian guard used Megan's advice to take down 3 Varkith soldiers in a row, using nothing but a metal rod and a flashlight. And Nathan Cole went to the front. He moved through the station's corridors alone, carrying a metal pipe he had pulled from a broken railing. He walked straight toward the sounds of fighting, and when he found Varkith soldiers, he engaged them. The Varkith were bigger than him, stronger than him, better armed than him. None of that seemed to matter. Nathan fought the way the DNA report had predicted a human would fight, with total commitment, absolute refusal to stop, and a pain tolerance that terrified the aliens watching on the security cameras. He was shot in the left arm during his first encounter. He switched the pipe to his right hand and kept going. He was stabbed in the side during his third encounter. He pressed his hand against the wound, tightened his jaw, and kept going. A Varkith twice his size threw him through a thin interior wall during his fifth encounter. He got up from the rubble, spat blood on the floor, and broke the Varkith's knee with a single swing. The Varkith had raided dozens of stations. They had fought hundreds of species. They had never encountered anything like this. Reports began to spread through their ranks, confused, panicked messages about a creature that could not be stopped. One Varkith officer reportedly told his squad leader that they had boarded a station defended by demons. They were not far wrong. By hour 4, the Varkith advance had completely stalled. By hour 5, they were retreating. By hour 6, they were back on their ships and pulling away from the station. The Union fleet arrived 3 hours later to find the Boros relay battered, scarred, and leaking atmosphere from a dozen breaches, but intact. Over 5,000 civilians had survived. The Varkith had left behind 47 of their own soldiers, most of them unconscious, many of them with injuries consistent with being struck by a metal pipe. Nathan Cole was found sitting on the floor of a corridor on Deck 6. His back was against the wall. His shirt was soaked with blood, some of it his, some of it not. The metal pipe lay across his knees. 3 unconscious Varkith soldiers were piled at his feet. When the Union medic reached him, Nathan looked up with tired eyes and half a smile. "Sorry about the mess," he said. The medic stared at him. She was Tiresian. She had blue skin and yellow eyes, and she had never seen so much blood on a living person before. "You should be dead," she said. Nathan thought about that for a moment. Then he shrugged. "Yeah," he said, "I get that a lot." The footage spread across the galaxy in less than a day. The Boros relay had over 2,000 internal cameras, and almost all of them had been recording during the attack. Within hours of the Union fleet's arrival, clips were being shared on every major communication network in known space. Within 2 days, billions of beings on thousands of worlds had watched what 4 humans did on a station that should have fallen. They watched Grace Ellison walk through smoke-filled corridors with a Teresian child on her back, and 3,000 civilians following behind her, moving in perfect order because her voice told them it would be okay, and somehow they believed her. They watched Danny Ortiz bleeding from the head, sitting at a maintenance terminal with his wrench beside him, calmly rerouting the station systems, while a Varkith raiding party tore through the decks below. They watched him knock a soldier unconscious with a single hit, drag the body into a closet, and go right back to typing. They watched Megan Shaw, a biologist who had never held a weapon in her life, stand in a medical bay surrounded by injured aliens, calmly dissecting an enemy soldier to find its weaknesses, and then broadcasting those weaknesses to every defender on the station. And they watched Nathan Cole. They watched him walk down a corridor with nothing but a metal pipe, straight towards sounds that made every other species run the other way. They watched him get shot and keep walking. They watched him get stabbed and keep fighting. They watched him get thrown through a wall and stand back up as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. They watched him break a Varketh soldier, nearly twice his size, with his bare hands and a piece of broken railing. The galaxy watched all of it, and the galaxy did not know what to think. Some species called the humans heroes. Others called them monsters. A few called them both. The Galactic Union High Council reconvened 12 days after the incident. This time, the chamber was full. Not just the 12 founding members. Representatives from over 100 species had requested observation seats. The room was packed. The air was thick with tension, and the smell of 100 different biologies pressed close together. Dr. Kale stood in the center of the chamber again. He looked tired. His black shell had lost some of its shine, and his dark eyes moved more slowly than usual. He had spent the last 12 days updating his report, and what he had added changed everything. He began with what had not changed. The biology was the same. The genome was the same. Humans were still, by every measurable standard, one of the most dangerous species the archive had ever recorded. Their healing capability, their endurance, their pain suppression, their environmental resilience, all of it was confirmed by what happened at Boros Relay. The footage was not just evidence of courage. It was a live demonstration of exactly what the DNA had predicted. The biological assessment stands, Kale said. Humans are, on a cellular level, built for survival under conditions that would kill nearly every species in this room. This has not changed. This will not change. He paused. But I have added a new section to the report, one that the genetic data alone could never have revealed. He brought up a new display. It was not a chart, or a graph, or a genome map. It was a single phrase, written in the standard Union script. Behavioral override. Kale explained it slowly, carefully, as if he were describing something fragile. Every apex predator in the archive behaves according to its biology, he said. Predators hunt. War organisms fight. Territorial species defend. They do what their DNA tells them to do. This is the foundation of our entire classification system. Biology predicts behavior. He looked around the chamber. Humans break this rule, he said. He gestured at the display. Their biology says fight. They build hospitals. Their biology says dominate. They form democracies. Their biology says consume. They plant forests. Their biology gives them the ability to destroy everything around them, and they have, many times throughout their history. But after each destruction, they chose to rebuild. After each war, they chose peace. Not because they are incapable of violence, but because they have decided, again and again, that they do not want it to define them. He turned to face Ambassador Velik directly. The crystalline being sat motionless in his seat, his body a pale, almost white shade. At Boros Relay, Kale continued, 4 humans defended 6,000 civilians against a full Varketh raiding fleet. They were outgunned, outnumbered, and had no obligation to fight. The Starward Crest could have undocked and escaped at any time. No one would have blamed them. No treaty required them to stay. He let the silence hold for a moment. They stayed because a station full of strangers was in danger. That is not the behavior of a predator. That is not the behavior of a war organism. That is something else entirely. The chamber was so quiet that the hum of the air recyclers sounded like a roar. His voice was different from last time. Softer, slower. The grinding stone replaced by something closer to gravel rolling over itself. I have watched the footage 17 times, Velik said. I watched the human engineer carry a Veshan child through a collapsing corridor. The child was not his species. The child was not his responsibility. He was injured. He was bleeding. He could barely walk. And he carried that child for 300 meters without stopping. He paused. His crystal body shifted to a deep, steady blue, a color that in Rithani culture meant respect. "I withdraw my objection," he said. The chamber rippled with murmurs. Representative Amara Din of the Irani sovereignty spoke next. "I said 3 months ago that we classify species by what they choose to do, not by what they can do. The humans have now shown us their choice. I move for full membership." Elder Sin of the Pale Court raised his branch-like hand. "Seconded," he said. The vote was called. It was unanimous. Every single member of the Galactic Union High Council, including 3 representatives who had previously called for military action against Earth, voted to grant humanity full membership in the Union. Not as a restricted species, not as a monitored species, not as a threat, as protectors. The official reclassification was entered into the Galactic Archive that same day. The technician who processed it was a young Teresian named Teres, the same researcher who had first seen the red flags on her screen 3 months earlier. She opened the human file, deleted the original entry, and typed the new one with steady hands. Where it once read, "Non-threat herbivore adjacent species, likely prey class on homeworld," it now read, "Apex survivor species, highest known biological threat index among contactable sentients. Demonstrates unprecedented capacity for voluntary restraint and cooperative behavior. Recommended status, Allied Protector Class. Do not engage hostilely. They will not stop." Tyress read it back to herself 3 times. Then she saved the file and closed the terminal. On the far side of the galaxy, aboard the starward crest, a notification chime sounded in the cockpit. Nathan Cole was sitting in his chair, drinking something warm from a metal cup. His wound from Boros had mostly healed. The scars were still visible, thin white lines on his arms, and a slightly stiff movement in his left shoulder. But he was functional. He was always functional. He tapped the notification and read the message. It was short, an official communication from the Galactic Union High Council, informing the human delegation that their species had been granted full membership, effective immediately. He read it twice. Then he picked up the ship's intercom. "Hey, crew," he said. "Come to the cockpit. You are going to want to see this." Grace arrived first. She read the message over his shoulder and smiled, a slow, warm smile that reached her eyes. Danny showed up next, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. He read the message, let out a single loud laugh, and said, "About time. Also, I still haven't fixed that dent in the wall from Boros." Megan was last. She read the message carefully, nodded once, and then walked back to her quarters without saying much. Later that evening, she opened her personal log and typed a single entry. "They finally looked at what we are, and for the first time, they were not afraid of the answer." She closed the log and stared out her small window at the stars. They were bright and countless, and impossibly far away, and every single one of them was a place she might someday visit. The starward crest turned toward open space. The engines hummed. The stars stretched out ahead of them, wide and endless, and full of possibility. Behind them, in the archive on Valith 9, the human file sat quietly in the database. 43 red flags, a single reclassification, and a warning that would echo through the galaxy for centuries to come. They will not stop. And somewhere in the dark between the stars, 4 humans flew on, smiling, laughing, healing, and completely unaware of how extraordinary the rest of the galaxy thought they were. They were just people, after all. The research station Valith 9 floated in the cold dark of space, like a city made of metal and glass. It was old. It was massive. Over 300 different alien species had walked its halls at one point or another, and every single one of them had given something to the station's great project, the Galactic Genetic Archive. The archive was simple in purpose. Every species that joined the Galactic Union had to provide biological samples. Blood, tissue, bone marrow, whatever was available. The scientists on Valith 9 would then run those samples through deep sequence analysis, map the genome, and classify the species. Predator or prey, dangerous or harmless, useful or forgettable. It had been running for over 400 years, and in all that time, the results had rarely surprised anyone. Dr. Zorath Kale ran the lab. He was Veshan, tall, thin, covered in a hard black shell, like an insect from a nightmare. His eyes were large and dark, and moved independently of each other. He had 6 arms, and he used every single one of them when he worked. He had been the head researcher on Valith 9 for 22 years, and in all that time, he had never once been truly shocked by a sample. That was about to change. The notification came through on a quiet morning. A new species had made first contact with the Galactic Union. They called themselves humans. They came from a small rocky planet called Earth, tucked away on the far edge of an unremarkable spiral arm. Their ship had been picked up by a Union border patrol 3 weeks earlier, and after the initial contact protocols were completed, the humans had been invited to Valith 9 to contribute to the archive. Kale did not think much of it. New species came through every few years. Most of them were the same, soft things from warm planets, or hard things from cold ones, or strange floating things from gas worlds. He had seen it all. The human ship arrived at the station's docking bay on a Tuesday, by the human calendar. It was called the Starward Crest, and it was, by Union standards, laughably small. It looked like a metal box with engines stuck to the back. Kale watched it dock from the observation window and felt nothing. The humans walked out a few minutes later, and Kale felt even less. There were 4 of them. Their leader was a man named Nathan Cole. He was in his early 40s, average height, with short brown hair and lines around his eyes that came from smiling too much. He wore a simple uniform and carried no weapons. He shook hands with the station's greeting party and said something friendly that made a few of the alien officials laugh, even though they did not fully understand the joke. Behind him was his second-in-command, a woman named Grace Ellison. She was tall and lean, and walked with the straight back of someone who had spent time in a military. But her face was kind, and her voice was soft, and she spent the first 10 minutes on the station asking the alien guides about the artwork on the walls. Next was Danny Ortiz, the ship's engineer. He was shorter than the others, stocky, with dark hair and a wide grin that never seemed to leave his face. He talked constantly. He asked questions about the station's power systems, about the air recyclers, about the artificial gravity. He touched things he probably should not have touched. He apologized each time with a laugh that made it hard to stay angry at him. Last was Dr. Megan Shaw, their biologist. She was the one who would be providing the samples. She was quiet, with red hair pulled back in a simple tie, and calm green eyes that watched everything carefully. She carried a small case with her, and when she opened it in the lab, it contained 2 vials, one of blood, one of tissue, sealed and labeled in neat handwriting. Kale looked at the 4 of them as they stood in his lab, and he made his first assessment. They were soft. Their skin had no armor, no scales, no protective shell of any kind. They had flat teeth, blunt fingers, no claws, no venom glands. Their eyes faced forward, which usually indicated a predator species. But everything else about them screamed prey. They were slow compared to most species. They were weak compared to most species. They had no natural weapons at all. They also smiled constantly. Every one of them, even when they were not talking, their mouths curved upward slightly, as if they were always on the edge of being happy about something. It was, to Kale, deeply unremarkable. He typed a preliminary note into his file. New species, human, origin, Earth, Sol system. Initial observation, non-threat. Likely prey class on homeworld. No notable biological features. Minimal research priority. Megan Shaw handed the vials to Kale's junior researcher, a small amphibian-like scientist named Therese. Therese had wet blue skin and large yellow eyes that blinked sideways. She took the vials carefully, as if they were made of glass, and placed them into the sequencing machine. "How long will the analysis take?" Megan asked. "A few hours," Therese said. "Maybe less. The machine is very fast." Megan nodded and smiled. "That is amazing. On Earth, a full genome sequence used to take us years. We only got it down to a few days recently." Therese blinked. "Years? That is very slow." Megan laughed softly. "We are a young species. We are still learning." Kale did not pay attention to the conversation. He had already moved on to other work. The humans were not interesting. They were just another soft species from another small world. The galaxy was full of them. Nathan Cole spent the next 2 hours walking the station with Grace and Danny, talking to every alien they met. He asked about their worlds, their families, their food. He was polite in a way that confused some species. Not the careful politeness of diplomacy, but a genuine, easy warmth that came naturally. A few of the station's residents later said they had never met a new species that seemed so interested in them as individuals. Danny found the station's engineering bay and spent an hour fixing a broken coolant line that the maintenance crew had been ignoring for weeks. He did not ask permission. He just saw it was broken, borrowed a tool, and fixed it. When the chief engineer, a large rock-skinned Gorvathi, asked him why, Danny shrugged and said, "It was bugging me." Grace helped a lost group of young Teresian students find their way back to the education wing. She crouched down to their level when she spoke to them, and her voice was so gentle that one of the students grabbed her hand and did not want to let go. Megan stayed in the lab. She watched the sequencing machine work and made quiet conversation with Tyrese, asking about Veshan biology, about the archive, about how many species had been catalogued. Tyrese found herself enjoying the conversation more than she expected. By the time the Starward Crest departed that evening, the humans had left a small trail of confused goodwill behind them. They waved from the docking bay window as their ship pulled away. Danny pressed his face against the glass and made a funny expression that made 2 Orani dockworkers laugh so hard they had to sit down. Kale did not watch them leave. He was in his office, reviewing data from 3 other species that had been processed that week. The human samples sat in the sequencing machine, cycling through the deep analysis protocols, and Kale expected the results to be as boring as the species itself. The first flag came 47 minutes later. It was a small notification on Tyrese's screen, a red triangle with a number inside it. She glanced at it, frowned, and tapped it open. The sequencing system had found something in the human genome that it could not categorize. It had flagged it for manual review. Tyrese ran the segment again. The flag came back. She ran it a third time, using a different analysis protocol. The flag came back again, and this time it brought friends. 6 more red triangles appeared on her screen, then 12, then 20. Tyrese stared at her monitor. Her wet blue skin had gone pale. Her yellow eyes were wide and unblinking. She reached for the intercom with a shaking hand and called Dr. Kale. "Sir," she said, and her voice was barely a whisper, "I think you need to come see this."